Hello everyone, and welcome to another installment of Shower Thoughts, the budget commander series that proves Magic isn't pay to win. In this week's video, I'm going over my pick for the top 10 commanders from Martin's Machine that are easy to build on a budget, along with some key cards you should include if you're building these decks. They aren't listed in any particular order, and make sure to go check out my article over at the Commander's Herald after watching this video. And if you don't mind giving this video a like, it really helps out the channel. So without further ado, let's get into it. First up is BRBMTG and Flip. What a time to be alive. If you told me when I started playing Magic all those years ago, this would be a card, I'd laugh in your face. However, this is a real card. I love the fact that this commander draws you a card, can shoot down some big creatures, and has protection built in. Granted, I wouldn't use that protection all that often unless I have a brainstorm ready to go. You'll want to make sure to have ways to get all those lands back from your graveyard, either into your hand or onto the battlefield as ramp. Some key cards to include in the deck would be Abundance, Brash Taunter, World Shaper, and the Mending of Dominaria. Next up is Kroxa and Keranos. Kroxa gives me nightmares, and not just because the sheer amount of mouths that it has. Look at it, this thing has so many mouths. But it's how much work the original has done in 60-card formats. But now we get to play a version of it in Commander, and it doesn't suck. And it's bringing the best dog from Theros along for the ride. This deck can easily be built to be insanely powerful, and I know there are people who are already building CEDH decks with it. I just want to reanimate some big old beaters that hardly get any play, but you'll need to make sure you're filling up your graveyard with enough cards to use its ability. Some key cards to include would be Stitcher Supplier, Faithless Looting, Mesmeric Orb, Undead Butler, and Phyrexian Delver. Next on my list is Zimone and Dina. If you've read any of my previous articles or watched my previous videos, you know the things I look for in budget commanders are card draw and win conditions on a single card, and this commander has just that. While the drain effect isn't as powerful as Nekusar the Mind Erasers or Quasar Augur of Agonies, it can still drain the table quickly and lead to slightly more interesting play patterns than just casting Windfall and winning. One of my all-time favorite decks was actually a Jolriel deck, which also cares about drawing 2 cards each turn. Now I get to include her in the 99 of this deck. Key cards to include would be Retreat to Coralhelm, Gixian Puppeteer, Skewt Swarm, and Tatyova Benthic Druid. Next is Heliod the Radiant Dawn, and Heliod the Warped Eclipse. Let's be real, no one really liked Heliod as a character, right? He won't be missed in my book. But as a commander, this is by far the more interesting Heliod of the bunch. Little fun fact, this is the first Heliod to not be indestructible, or have the devotion keyword. This card cares about casting spells at instant speed, and then reducing the cost whenever an opponent draws a card. He kind of reminds me of Rakdos Lord of Riots, but has access to Omniscience. I really want to build Eldrazi Tribal, but I don't recommend that on a budget. There are a lot of great options to pick, from artifact creatures, to big flyers, or X-Spell Tribal. Ideally, you'll want to make your opponents draw right before your turn, giving them a smaller window to react, and giving you the chance to untap with all of your new threats. Some key cards to include would be Secret Rendezvous, Vision Skeins, Prosperity, and Fascination. Next up is Baral and Kari Zev. Cheating on mana is one of the best things you can do in Magic, and this lets you copy instant or sorcery spells whenever you happen to cast one. Granted, it does have to be lesser mana value, but you can cast a Ponder and get a free Ancestral Vision. And let's not overlook the stats of this thing. You could make a pseudo Voltron commander using combat tricks to swing in for a ton of damage early on. Also, you can use Delve spells as a way to cheat out higher mana value spells. Some key cards I would include in this deck would be Ancestral Visions, Inevitable Betrayal, Wheel of Fate, and Treasure Cruise. Inga and Eska are next. Simic's gonna Simic. There's nothing fancy with this card. You get benefits from playing big creatures, which is always fun to me. The idea for this deck is going to be pretty simple. Just play a bunch of dorks and accelerate into big creatures. While you could use Karuga the Macro Sage as a companion, you lose out on a lot of the good mana dorks to help you draw cards early on. I would build this commander with only creatures so we can ramp into budget bombs such as Mere Battlesphere or Sharding Sphinx. And this commander doesn't specify non-tokens, something to keep in mind while deck building. Key cards to include would be Wood Elves, Mercfiend Liege, Hornet Queen, or Momir Vig Simic Visionary. Next is Zurgo and Ojutai. Now this is an interesting Jeskai commander. Finally. Jeskai Dragons isn't really a theme we've seen before, but it scratches my brain in just the right way for some reason. It could be the card selection we get from hitting with dragons, or the fact we can keep returning our commander to our hand and making it hard for our opponents to deal with. Whatever the reason, this is getting added to my list of brews to try out. The most recent Commander Legends, love it or hate it, gave us adventure dragons such as Young Red Dragon and Young Blue Dragon. And since we can return these to our hand, we'll get to use the adventure part of the card over and over again for value. We will also want to include other dragons with enter the battlefield or leave the battlefield triggers too. Some key cards to include would be Sneak Attack, Feywild Visitor, Lapis Orb of Dragonkind, and Furcrag Cunning Instigator. Quintorius Loremaster. Boros Self-Mill seems like an interesting archetype and definitely easy to build on a budget. My first thought was to build Boros artifacts. After all, you can cheat out some pretty powerful artifacts such as Chromatic Orrery or Darksteel Forge. But I'm here to build on a budget, and budget those cards are not. So let's give Boros Enchantress a try instead. What's great is our commander has us cast the card, which means we can get triggers from cards like Sigil of the Empty Throne. Quick rules note, this card still follows timing restrictions, so you can't cast creature at instant speed unless the card specifies otherwise. Some key cards to include would be Sigil of the Empty Throne, Mesa Enchantress, Big Score, and Quintorius Field Historian. Next up, we have Plukronos Reborn and Plukronos Engine of Ruin. Step aside, Gargos, a new Hydra commander's in town. Now, if I'm being honest, I don't really care all that much about the front side of this card. A 4/5 with reach is pretty unimpressive in Commander, but the backside is an absolute house. A 6/6 reach and lifelink is no slouch, and getting 2 additional Hydras whenever a non-token Hydra dies can get out of hand very quickly. I have a cute trick I'd like to share in case you haven't thought about it. Most Hydras have X in their mana cost and no power or toughness. Plukronos cares when a non-token Hydra dies. See where I'm going? So what if we cast one of these Hydras and not pay anything for X, having them die instantly? Suddenly, we're making a 3/3 lifelink and a 3/3 reach token for 1 or 2 green mana. What's even better is their mana values are also low, so we can recur them with cards like Sun Titan, just to have them die right away again and make more tokens. Some key cards I would include would be Sun Titan, Kayla's Reconstruction, Savine's Reclamation, and Return to the Ranks. And finally, Thalia and the Gitrog Monster. I was saving the best for last. Well, my favorite anyways. Abzan has no shortage of great value commanders, and frankly this one is no different. There are plenty of great paths to go down with this commander, from landfall to aristocrats. Sadly, extra combats is out since I couldn't really find any effects in those colors. By far, the easiest and most budget strategy to go is landfall. Even on a tight budget, you can still build an incredibly powerful deck, especially with the reprints of Tireless Tracker and Tireless Provisioner in the most recent Commander precons. If you're looking for some great cards to include, I'd highly recommend you check out my article and my video where I go over my top 10 budget landfall cards. Some key cards to include would be Roaring Earth, Retreat to Hagra, Perennial Behemoth, and Scribnibblers. And with that, thanks for watching. Special shout out to my patrons shown on screen here. If you'd like to join them in supporting the channel, you can find a link to it in the video description below. Otherwise, just give this video a like and leave a comment. It's free to do, and it always helps. Also, check out the Commander's Herald. I've been writing articles for them. As always, this has been Ben with Bathroom Brews MTG. And remember, always wash your hands.